wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement.
Hey guys, the following is a conversation I had with Dr. David Henley. Dr. Henley is a psychiatrist that studied at the Indiana School of Medicine and has spent the last 25 years both helping people with brain disorders and researching Alzheimer's disease. He's passionate about teaching others how the brain works so they can better understand themselves and others. His goal for this education is to help decrease the stigma associated with brain disorders and to just help us be more tolerant of one another. Many of his goals and his passions align with my goals for this channel, and that makes for a really compelling conversation. Spoiler alert, in the hour and 50 minutes that we spent talking together, Dr. Henley still couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, and that's okay, because we will have more conversations in the future. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you guys do too.
There's no mercy.
Just talking before we put the headsets on about how you said that, your mind picks up certain things with the senses that we have, and then your mind creates a solution for the gaps in what our senses don't pick up.
That's right.
Is that what you were saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, that was fascinating to me.
Well, so here's a concrete example of that. So you're in an old house, a real world scenario, right? You're in an apartment, hotel room, old house, whatever. Mm-hmm. Mostly old houses, that's where people get this stuff. But you're in an old house, there's a creaking sound. Mm-hmm. Some people's minds will immediately go to, it's a ghost, right? Or you see something in the sky and you're not sure what that is. It's immediately a UFO, right? Mm-hmm. That's interesting to me from a brain perspective. The brain is filling in the gaps. What could this be? Because it doesn't know, right? When it doesn't know something, it fills in the gap and it assumes certain things. Whether it's those things or not, who knows, right? I can't tell you if they're a ghost or not, but my brain doesn't necessarily do that. Everybody's brain's a little different. Some people go to the ghost, maybe they watch a lot of ghost shows, right? Other people, they're more scientific and analytical, and they're like, oh, that's probably a mouse in the attic scurrying around, and
Do you think those
shifting of the house as it expands and contracts, with the temperature changes during the day and at night and so on?
Do you think the people that go to the worst case scenario first are programmed that way through evolutionary biology to assume that the worst case scenario is there to avoid danger?
Maybe the initial assumption is it's a threat, right? Mm-hmm. And anytime there's a threat, your brain it's hardwired to.
Let's assume that's a UFO. Let's go inside.
Yeah, or there's a ghost in the house and I need to be. I don't know, but throughout history, there are some people who are more vigilant. They evolved to be more vigilant than other people, and that can be protective if you think about it. So you've got a community of people, and they're let's say eons ago, right, when we lived in small little communities or clans, and you'd have somebody who was hypervigilant, and so every time there'd be a crack in the woods or something else, they would immediately sound the warning, alarm, because that could be a lion, right? And that's protective because they're the first ones to notice that, whereas the other people are just like, it's just it's just a branch falling or a squirrel or something else. Those people might not survive if it really was a lion, right?
Right.
So it's helpful to have that hypervigilance, but then the part of the brain that controls that is your fear response, right? It's your amygdala and so on. There's circuits, a lot of circuits in the brain, but this is one that's kind of a primitive one. It forces you to pay attention. And now let's fast forward and let's just say, I guess I'm digressing a bit, but let's talk about something I think is important to understand about any of this stuff before we talk about it. And that is that every human trait exists on a continuum, okay? And you name it, right? Athleticism. Some people are just naturally really athletic, and other people are uncoordinated, right? They can't do very much without falling over, like me. But any trait you think of, so it could be how vigilant you are. It's like we were using that example. It could be your visual acuity. It could be your personality traits, how obsessive compulsive you are versus how in your personality. Versus how sort of lackadaisical or things don't bother you, you don't really care that much, that kind of thing. It exists on a continuum. And where we fall in this continuum as a person is what makes us unique, right? So some people are, very good with language and not so good with math. Other people are very good with math, not so good with language. Some people are good at a lot of stuff. And those are the people I look at. I don't know about you. I look at those people and I'm jealous. how could you be, strong musically and a genius, from an intellectual standpoint of knowledge, and personable, and successful in every other way? It's like some people get all of it, but that's the sort of infinite nature of humans and what makes us who we are. And I think that's really cool to think about. But as you think about sort of how we interact with each other, which is something that we talked about before we started recording, I think it's important for people to start thinking a little bit about how the brain works and how we might have unconscious ways of viewing each other that come from something evolutionary or the way the brain develops or the unique experiences of that person.
But it's merely an assumption that our brains created in the absence of actual knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you don't understand something, you have a tendency to come up with things that may or may not be realistic.
And I guess that would be true in like literally every aspect of life, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this is a really cool conversation to have on this podcast because I think that your perspective is going to be extremely unique to actually put into context what's happening in the real world from the brain. And I think that the best way to actually be in charge of that is understand why things are happening the way that they happen from the brain.
Right.
So I think this will be really valuable to our viewers to have this conversation.
Right.
So these things already are so cool.
Yeah, I think if nothing else, wouldn't it be awesome if people, the first thing out of somebody's mind wasn't, oh my God, it's a ghost, but the first thing is, let me think about that. What else could it be?
Yeah.
It would really help people because of their anxiety and fear and so on.
So what are some misconceptions that you need to tear down, and what are some frameworks that you need to build up around the brain to be able to lay a foundation for this conversation? Is there any common misconceptions to start with that people have about the brain that?
Well, the first one is what I mentioned earlier, which is I think we all think that we're fully in control of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one major misconception. I think another thing is that we assume that, human beings, they all have different brains, of course, but simple things like a brain that's bigger is a better brain. They're more intelligent or whatever else. That's not true. The issue of the continuum is another thing I think it would be helpful for people to think about, and to dive into that for a little bit more detail, so people can start to use this thought process a little bit. If you think about it, the way we think it works is that there's a genetic blueprint of who you're supposed to be, who you're gonna be, based on your genes, your DNA, and so on, right, from infancy, and then the environment will shape that a little more to one side or to the other side of wherever you are in that continuum originally. So, for example, you're born and you're very anxious, right? You're a very anxious child, and some kids are like that. Even if you look at dogs, right? You have animals are the same way. Some are wired such that they're really anxious and scared about everything, and others are, doesn't matter, So if you start on one place on a particular continuum, you can actually learn to shift from one side to the other based on your environment. Your environment actually physically changes the brain. So if something bad happens to you in your environment that's very scary or threatening, or even just learning something new, if you're learning something from us talking today, there are new connections that weren't there before. So if you basically you're basically able to move to one side or other of where your genetic predisposition is on this continuum. An example of that would be a child who's very anxious, right? They're born to be kind of anxious, and anybody they see, they're kind of scared of. That's a stranger anxiety. All kids have some of that, but some kids it's really more intense. But if they're raised in an environment where there is a lot of threat, right? There's abuse, abuse between the mom and dad, or maybe the mom or dad, one of them's not there. There's lots of stress in that environment. That's not going to be good for that child to ease that child's angst about their environment, right? So they're going to probably be even more anxious growing up. And it turns out, actually, when this happens, they have more incidents of anxiety disorders and depression in adulthood when they're exposed to this kind of stress. But then if you take somebody, that same person, that same child, right, the same place on the continuum, and they grow up in an environment that's very calming, and, not that no environment's perfect, of course, but instead of being the opposite, what we just talked about, it's more supportive and calming to that child, then that child's going to have a little less they actually have
Less
a
of a
little
struggle with
resilience,
that. Yeah.
resilience to the environment, and instead of everything being so scary.
So basically, the DNA dictates the range at which you can experience this position on the continuum, but your environment will determine on which side of the continuum you rest.
Yeah,
Is that
the
what?
environment can shift it one way or another, make it
Right.
worse or better.
And genetics dictates where the middle
it
point would
starts
be,
out, yeah,
where the average would be.
And you don't usually see somebody who starts on one end of the continuum and then completely reverses.
So Justin Bieber was definitely born with the ability to sing to some extent genetically.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes, yeah.
Gotcha. And I do not have a chance at becoming Justin Bieber. I understand.
That's a great point. Yes,
Okay.
that's a good one. Actually, back to the point about the brain changing. When I talk about this, the brain changing.
Yeah.
We should talk about that a second, because what does that mean, right? There's new connections in the brain, but also just from the fact of, the stress response system that you have. It's one of the circuits in the brain, and even animals have it, right? In that situation where you're the child and you have a really stressful environment, okay? We now know, which is, I think is fascinating, that kids who grow up in those kind of environments, their stress response system actually downregulates a little bit. And that's really because, when you have stress going on, your body's able to handle some stress, right? It's got a stress response system, and then it peaks, the adrenaline and the cortisol and all that peaks, and then it should drop back down once the stressor drops. If you're chronically stressed, though, the organism senses that, hey, I can't survive like this, right? The heart rate can't be that high for that long. The blood pressure can't be that high for that long. It's gonna prematurely cause death of this organism. So the stress response system actually downregulates in those people so that they don't have the constant blood pressure high and heart rate high. But the consequence of that is that when you get older and you start going through adulthood and you start having stressors that normally your system would peak and then drop back down again, it doesn't happen. You remember, because it's down regulated a little bit.
Gotcha.
So those folks, it turns out, have more trouble with depression and anxiety because they don't have that sort of normal ability to handle stress and come back from it and then handle.
That's
another
really
stress.
interesting, actually.
Yeah. So, I'm not saying that every person that has depression has child abuse history or anything like that, and it doesn't have to be child abuse either. It can be, there's all types of stressors, right?
Right. Anything.
Anything.
Your parents, lost their jobs, and 5 years of your life was rough while you were growing up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You were bullied. That's
Yeah.
another one, right? So even
That'd
if
be
your
really
childhood was,
interesting to track the progression over time of society. When society at large was doing very, very well in the come up, and the average childhood would have been easier, I wonder what the result of that was on society later in time from that perspective.
it's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And it's the same thing in the reverse when society went through extremely challenging times, world wars
Yeah.
and this and that. What downwind consequences are there that we don't attribute to a time past and the events of a times past.
Yeah, and I think in the past, we didn't know any of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So when you went through something like the Great Depression, you either survived or you didn't. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion about,
How are we going to handle this?
depression, anxiety,
Yeah.
all of that stuff, right? Nobody really even knew what that was. And if they got really depressed, they went to a state hospital or someplace where people didn't, they were kind of lost to society, so you didn't see them. Yeah. That was kind of sad, actually, that happened. But that's just, again, another example of when we don't understand the brain, we
Put something together to make it make sense, right?
Yeah.
So back to the continuum piece real quick. I'm just curious, is the continuum something in your ability to fluctuate where you're going to spend your life on that continuum? Is that something that can change only during the developmental years of your life? Because that's kind of where we've talked about it so far. Or is it something that like individuals would have control over today? If they wanted to change something in their life, do they have a chance at flexing their position on the continuum?
Absolutely.
And through what? Is it just repetition and habit forming?
Well, it's actually through learning, right? So, when we talk about psychotherapy, and everybody
Mm-hmm.
talks about, I'm going to my therapist, people talk about that. I don't know that people really understand what therapy is unless they've done it, right? But literally, it changes the brain. And why does it change? How does it change the brain? Psychotherapy changes the brain because you're learning something that you didn't know before, and you're learning maybe skills. Certain types of therapy teach you skills about how to handle, let's say, a panic attack. How do you handle it? Well, I start to have my heart rate go up. I start to become afraid I'm going to die, and then I stop and I say, wait a minute. Doc told me that this is probably a panic attack. I'm going to be okay. I'm not going to die. And what does that do? Well, that boom, that takes away that fear, right? It drops the fear down. So you've just changed your brain, right? Because the panic attack didn't occur, or it occurs less, less severely or whatever. That's actually how you affect the continuum. Now, again, I mean, I don't know that you can take somebody who is on that anxious spectrum on the higher end of that continuum and make them to the point where nothing phases them anymore, outside of with a drug or something. But, nothing phases them anymore, and they just go through life, lackadaisical kind of.
So I've got a more specific question. A large contingent of the demographic that watches this podcast so far is younger age males.
Okay.
A lot of which are current or future entrepreneurs.
Okay.
This group of people are hyper-focused on productivity. Mm-hmm. What sort of suggestions would you have, I mean, outside of going to therapy and having your brain changed strategically, what suggestions would you have for having these people, what can we do to be more productive in our daily lives and with our projects and working?
So that's a whole nother can of worms. So let's go down that a little.
Okay.
Okay. Learning about your brain and knowing what your brain is, how it works, mm-hmm. is your biggest advantage. Okay. If you can, as an entrepreneur, I think, you can say it's all about your knowledge of business and all this other stuff. But let me tell you, if you have no clue about how your brain works, and I don't care if you're the smartest guy in the world when it comes to entrepreneurial pursuits, say that fast 3 times.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, because what are you going to do? You're probably going to be this guy that stays up half the night and gets 2 hours of sleep and says, I can do it without sleep.
There's a huge culture around that in entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And they jack up on the monster drinks and everything to stimulate themselves, right?
Yep.
What do you suppose is going to happen?
You're going to crash and burn in a couple days, right?
We're human.
Yeah.
You're just human. You may think you're, not human. I mean, even Elon Musk, right?
Yep.
Everybody idolizes Elon Musk. I think he's done great things. He's had a lot of great ideas.
I don't know if you can consider him human, though.
Well, he's human. I guarantee you he's human, right? Yeah. And I guarantee you if he were listening to this podcast, he would admit that, I am human. And
because he's pushed to a breaking point.
He's pushed himself to a breaking point,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, he slept. My understanding is he slept in his office or in his
in the factory for a year, literally half of a year.
Yeah. So
4 hours of sleep a night.
I mean, a lot of the successes he had came from that. But the problem with that is at what cost, right?
Exactly. He probably shaved some years off the end of his life from that.
Yeah, maybe. So talk about the stress. Wow. Mm-hmm. So what I would say, as far as to be successful, the very first thing you have to do is you got to take care of your body and your brain. And if you don't do that, you may get success for a little while, but you're going to flame out, and that's not good for you. So what kind of things do I mean by that? So I mentioned sleep. Most people should get somewhere 6, 7, 8 hours, somewhere between 6 and 8 hours of sleep a night is what they say on average people should get. And it's not, I think there's a lot of misnomers about sleep. I think people think that, I can get a couple hours here or there and it adds up to 6 or 8, I'm good. Or they think that, I can sleep during the day one day, and then the next time, and I'll be awake all the way till the following night, and I'll sleep that night, and that's not good for you either. The better you understand your brain and your body and how it was engineered, right? How it evolved the way it is and why, and what it needs, the better you're going to feel and the better, more productivity you're going to have. So, for example, and people like this, right? If you go to bed at the same time every night and you get up at the same time every morning, 6, 8 hours of sleep, something like that.
You've a regulated circadian rhythm.
You've regulated your rhythms, right?
Yeah.
Your brain has a clock, and it performs the best. You think the best. Your stress levels, you can handle more stress and things if your brain is, if you do that, if you have a nice day-night cycle, right? And if you're a night shift worker, that's okay. You don't have to be a day shift worker, and only day shift workers are the ones that have healthy brains and are successful. That's not true. But if you're a night shift worker, you probably should be working at night, staying awake all night. Even the days you're off, you should stay awake those nights at the same time, and then go to bed at the same time in the morning and sleep those 6, 8 hours, and then get up and do your thing. The other thing is exercise, right? You have to make time for exercise. Our bodies are not engineered to sit for 9 hours a day and then sit and watch some TV in the evening and then go to bed. And, you're going to, first of all, you may have obesity. We can talk about that at some point if you want. That's one thing, but you're going to have heart disease and diabetes, all the other things that are terrible, high blood pressure, and all these things that are
And
bad.
just you'll chronically be tired too.
You will,
which is a
chronically be tired.
complete disservice to productivity.
Right.
So yeah.
So the very best thing is you get that good night's sleep, same schedule. Let's just pretend it's a day-night cycle that's normal, right? So you're working during the day, sleeping at night. Get a good night's sleep, 6-8 hours. Get up in the morning, first thing in the morning, get some bright light. Your body also is very responsive to bright light. So in the winter months, in the northern hemisphere, in the winter months, people get we call it seasonal affective disorder, or
I get a touch of it.
yeah.
I lose motivation. It's not that I get depressed at all. It's just I don't want to do anything.
Yeah.
I'd rather sit around and do nothing.
I have a weird theory about that. That's just a theory, but
That we used to hibernate.
Yes.
Is it really your theory?
Yes,
Yeah, because
exactly.
it was actually an
Very much
evolutionary
like that.
biologist I was listening to that has said exactly that.
Yeah.
That we used to hibernate, and so there's still just a touch of that left over in our brains, and it's just enough to make us tired.
Yeah.
And for some people, it's just enough to make us depressed.
Well, there's more than that too. It also. So what else happens when in the winter when there's not as much light? Your metabolism slows. You crave carbs more, right? I'm thinking about things that are also in common with hibernation. Right?
Yeah.
You crave carbs more. Your energy level drops, like you said, right? You want to sleep more. All of these things, which do sort of sound a little like hibernation.
Yeah, I mean, what evolutionary pressures would have created those exact same urges if not hibernation?
Exactly.
So-
Well, if you think about it too, before we had houses and heat and all of the modern conveniences, right? Hibernation made sense. Like for bears and so on, right? It makes sense. They don't have, there's not a lot of food. It's not a lot of plentiful food out there, right? Mm-hmm. And you're expending a lot of energy if you're out in a big snowbank trying to hunt something. That's a lot of energy you're expending. You need water, but it's all frozen. I mean, there's some advantages to kind of just pulling back and surviving out the winter just by sleeping it out.
We're sort of in
sleeping it
a
off.
state of hibernation all year round anymore. We kind of stay in one little spot in our house, and we have all of our stocked food.
Yeah, yeah.
So
But this is why I think that, the other piece of success is that bright light. You need to get a good number of hours of bright light a day. And I think in the first thing in the morning, that's really helpful because it's sort of resetting your clock. It's telling your body, okay, yeah, it's time to get up. It's time to go do things. Exercise is good too because I think evolutionarily, right, what'd you do? The first thing you did in the morning, we did over the eons is we'd get up and we'd go looking for food and water, right? So let's get some exercise first thing in the morning, and then you start approaching your day, and you got to eat right and all the stuff that the other stuff that you know about already, and that's going to make you much better, much more successful as an entrepreneur than the guy who just flames out because he's doing too much.
And another byproduct of everything you just said is the fact that you will be physically more fit.
Yes.
In every way, shape, and form. You'll feel better. You'll look better. When you look better, you're more confident. When you're more confident, you can sell yourself better. Entrepreneurship is just about selling yourself, right? That's the first thing. So, I mean, it's an asymmetrical investment in yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly. You invest one thing, and that's in your body, and you get many things in return.
Yep.
So
yeah, that's super important.
Sleep specifically, I think, is so crazy to me. It's crazy to me how underappreciated it is. You spend a third of your life sleeping, I mean, plus or minus, and that third of your life dictates the quality of the other 2/3. Why would you not invest everything that you possibly can in your sleep?
What did we talk about before? When you don't understand something,
That's true.
you stigmatize it or you don't do the right thing.
Yeah.
Right?
And here I am saying this with full confidence and knowing that that's the case when it comes to sleep. And I still slack on a lot of things when it comes to sleep.
Yeah, nobody's perfect. And the body is certainly not, it's not like you're going to fall apart if you miss one night's sleep, right? And we all have jet lag. We fly overseas or we, stay up, college kids, right? They stay up half the night on the weekends and then, and the Monday morning comes, they got an 8 a.m. class and they're just wiped, right? All of us do that, and it's not going to kill us immediately or anything, but I'm saying continuously doing that is not healthy after a while. And if you, the old, you remember in college, a lot of kids will do this thing where they stay up all night cramming for a test.
Yep.
And then the next day they go in and try to.
Pulling all-nighters.
Yeah, pulling all-nighters.
Yep.
They might make it through the test. They might do okay. Probably not. There was a study once that where they showed that people who went for, all night without sleep, basically, it had the equivalent of like almost a mild dementia the next day because their cognition is so screwed up from not having any sleep. And one of the things that so again, we don't know all about sleep. We don't understand everything that happens when people sleep, but we do know some things. We know that there's a bunch of stages of sleep, and there's deep stages of sleep where you dream and other things, and you need to have 4 to 5 cycles of those. And the normal cycle of sleep is about a 90 on average, average for people, 90 minutes. So you start with stage 1 and you go all the way through to stage 4 in 90 minutes. The deep stages of sleep, if you don't get 4 to 5 of those every night, that's not a good thing. That increases blood pressure. It makes you have more depression, more cognitive impairment. Some people think there's actually a more risk for dementia from Alzheimer's disease if you don't sleep well later in life. The theory behind that is that one of the problems in Alzheimer's disease is people will accumulate a protein called amyloid. Well, it turns out when you sleep, what do you suppose happens?
I'm guessing there's a process that reduces the amyloid in your brain.
Exactly right. It
Gotcha.
helps clear amyloid.
I know that when you're sleeping, that's actually when your brain is firing the hardest it ever does. Like everybody thinks that when you're sleeping, your brain is calm.
Yeah, it's not.
But it's the exact opposite. It's
right.
firing way harder than it does during the day. What processes are taking place, and what's requiring all of that energy?
So we don't know everything. I will tell you a couple things we do know. So first of all, back to the college student, right? If you really want to learn something, it is not good to pull an all-nighter, cram it all in there. You'll learn it just long enough to take the test, maybe. If you're lucky, like I said, you'll be a little cognitively impaired when you're taking the test, but it isn't going to stick with you. One of the things that happens when you sleep is called long-term potentiation. It basically means you take your short-term memories of things that happened through the day, in the last couple of days, whatever, and when you sleep, they get put into long-term memory. That's long-term potentiation. It happens in animals, happens in humans. So if you don't sleep, if you don't get good sleep, you're not going to lay things into long-term memory.
That's crazy.
That's
awesome.
Yeah.
So does that process only happen while you're sleeping?
That's when we consolidate.
So
our
how
long-term
long
memories.
is the window for short-term memories? So say I have a car accident today, right? I'm going to remember that for life.
Yeah, but that's a different. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
So is it considered short-term memory until I go into sleep, get the long-term potentiality? Is that what the word is? Potentiality?
Long-term potentiation.
Potentiation.
Yeah.
So I'm carrying that with me through the rest of the day, and sleep is what actually applies that memory?
Yeah, the things that happen today. If you remember some of these things we talked about, and you're going to remember for the long term over the next several years, that has to be put into your long term memories when you sleep at night.
That's so cool.
Now, the one thing you brought up was the car accident thing. So let's talk about memory just for a second. So there's all different types of memory, but one of the things that happens with memory is that again, evolutionarily, we're programmed such that if something is really traumatic, it's like a stamp. It's like another analogy I use with memory is, you ever hike through a forest? And when you hike through the forest, the first time you hike through the forest, you can look back, but you can't really tell where you've been.
Okay.
But if you hike through it a whole bunch of times, you start to wear down a path, and now you can remember where you've been.
Okay.
That's how memory works in the brain. Now, let's say
it creates less resistance each time the path's traveled.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you know this, right? If you play Guitar Hero or you do anything where you're learning something new, the more times you do it, the better you get.
So that's the physical manifestation of repetition.
Yes.
That's so cool. Okay.
So now you've got this little trail that you've made, right? And that's one sort of memory. But now let's talk about a memory where you're in a battle, right? You're in war, and your buddy gets blown up next to you, right? That's a terrible, traumatic event that happens, and our brains are wired in such a way that that's like a bulldozer going through that forest the first time. The bulldozer goes right through. There's no question where it's been. As a matter of fact, you've got such a big path that you're going right back down that path over and over again.
Can't forget it.
You're revisiting and reliving all of these traumatic
That's
memories.
an incredible analogy. So in that same analogy, the memories that once existed in that path, are those gone? Does a traumatic event ruin some other parts of your memory?
It can reshuffle things a little bit. It can skew other memories and things. I don't necessarily think it. Well, it's a good question. I mean, it depends on what it is, I suppose, what sort of memory it is. Remember that there's lots of ways to access memory, right?
Right.
That one has to do with emotion. So the more emotionally charged something is, that could be good or bad, right? But in our case, we were using the bad one, which is the fear or the threat, life-threatening situation. That's like the most potent, because the brain, from a survival standpoint, you'd want to remember things that are really traumatic. So the last time you were hiking through the woods and you saw or you heard a couple of cracked limbs, let's say, and next thing you knew, you were attacked by a lion. Your brain is wired so that it will always remember that.
Yeah.
So that you're going through the woods again, you hear a couple of cracks,
You're
going to be
just
like,
to take off and you're going to think about it.
exactly, right? Because that's survival.
Yeah.
But the brain, there's all different ways of accessing memory. And what I find interesting is that I'll talk to people sometimes who are not consciously aware of some traumatic event that happened years ago at all, right? The brain has a way of protecting itself by not letting you remember things in some people. So it's people call it repression, but it may not be, it's not a conscious thing. I think it happens unconsciously as the brain's way of protecting itself, because if you have to relive these memories and all this stuff over and over again, it's really traumatic and a chronic stressor. And this is PTSD, right? Some folks have that. It's called PTSD. But I think in some people, they're able to sort of forget or put all that in the background or block that off, wall it off, so to speak, and protect that memory so it doesn't chronically stress them. And so I think that just blanking where I was going there. What was your question?
So if when the bulldozer goes through over that path, does that
Yes.
actually wipe out old memories too in order to make way for this new traumatic one?
Oh, I know
and we
what
went
it
into, there's different pathways. This one was tied to emotion.
Yes.
Right.
There's different pathways to get to a memory. Sometimes I hold up my hand and I say the emotional pathway. So if you have fear or anger or happiness or whatever, it can that reminds you of something that happened before, you can access that memory. It also can be all your senses, right? So if you hear something, a song or whatever, if you taste something, if you smell something. I had a patient once who did not remember that he was abused as a child, right? All the memories were gone of that. He had no idea, never told me about that. At one point, he was walking through an airport and he smelled something that reminded him of the smells that he had witnessed when he was going through this abuse. And everything just came flooding back. It's like, bam, that just through the smell.
That's crazy.
Another example of that is an Alzheimer's disease, right? Alzheimer's disease, people lose their memory, short-term memory first, and then eventually long-term memories. And families will sometimes come to me and say, I think mom's cured. And I'll be like, well, why is that? Well, for years, she hasn't remembered, she hasn't had, very, very good memory. And so we thought she'd forgotten about these, we talked a lot about, the times where she used to bake bread with her mom when she was a child. And she used to talk about that when she was younger, but it seems like that's been gone for years. And we'll talk about it and she doesn't remember it. We'll show pictures of it and she doesn't remember it. But all of a sudden she remembered it. This week she remembered it again. And I'll start asking, what happened? What's the situation? This is a real world example actually, where they were baking the same bread that she had made before. She'd lost the ability to visually remember, to verbally remember, to even the taste and everything else. The one thing she had left was the smell. The smell of that baking bread brought her all the way back, and that memory came flooding back.
That's incredible.
So, to your point about can a bulldozer? It's not really a linear process, if you know what I mean.
Sure, because there's multiple ways to get to that same spot, right?
It's so interconnected that it's not like one memory will go through and wipe out everything. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. Another thing that I just saw, I think on another podcast, was a doctor talking about if you want to remember something and really remember it long term, to apply some sort of importance or intent to it, and you'll keep it.
Yeah, that's what he or she, whatever that's what they're trying to do. Is they're trying to associate some emotional, some salience is the word we use, but some salience to that.
I tested it immediately and absolutely worked. I remembered a phone number. Yeah. It took me 5 times of reciting it, and it applied importance to it. Why do I need to remember this? And all of a sudden, I've never forgotten it.
Yeah, there's different tricks like that you can use. That's right.
Yeah.
But if you use it, if you use that all the time, I don't know.
Then nothing's important anymore. By comparison, it doesn't. Yeah.
Exactly. That's where I was going with that.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah. And I think he actually went along those. I think he said something similar to that as well. Mm-hmm. But no, that's truly fascinating. So, taking care of yourself, if we're going back to what people can do to better themselves in their pursuit of whatever it is they're trying to tackle in life. So starting with the fundamentals, starting with you're taking care of your brain by sleeping, taking care of your body by being active, being healthy. I'm sure nutrition plays a role in that as well.
Yes.
Okay, because we just didn't touch on that, but I think that's pretty clearly obvious.
Yep.
And then, so what else would you say if we wanted to go specifically into productivity? All the things we said are definitely a baseline, and there's no point in getting into any specifics if you're not even going to suffice those things first. When you're talking about productivity specifically, is there anything that you can shine light on that would help? One thing I struggle with is I'm pretty productive overall, but almost every single day I'll hit a window where I burn out.
Yeah.
And it usually lasts somewhere between 15 minutes and an hour.
Yeah.
You know, that's a lot of time I'd like to have back.
Yes.
Is there anything I can do to get rid of that?
So first of all, don't assume that you can just go for 9 hours straight without any breaks, and and you're going to have the energy, and even with the sleep and the exercise and all that, right? Those things aren't going to make you inhuman. You're still human, right? So you still need a time to a little downtime, right?
Okay.
A couple things about this is, my advice is that we tend to our best sort of intellectualizing in things happens earlier in the day. If you're on a day-night cycle like we talked about, right, where you get up and you exercise and all that, bright light, your best thinking time is before lunch usually. In other words, if you have to write a paper, or you have to do something very analytical or something like that as part of your job, the best time to do those things is first thing in the morning, and then do other things that take a little less
the more mundane tasks.
Yeah, the more like meetings and things like that. If you can. Now, some people have, where I work, there's people from all over the world, right? So
you're not really on your own
meetings
schedule
all day long because of the time zones. But if you have the luxury of being, maybe U.S. or all in the same time zone, schedule the meetings in the afternoon. And I will say that there is a normal, in the afternoons, if you're on this day-night cycle, let's say lunch is at noon, 2 o'clock or so, 1:30, 2 o'clock, 2:30, there's going to be this sort of normal down regulation of your energy level, and you're going to actually tend to want to sleep a little or take a little nap or something. And some companies, you've heard of this, right, where they have these little pods. And people,
this is one of them.
Is this one of them?
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's
I mean,
actually
it's welcome. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because for like a 15-minute quick power nap can sometimes really help. And then you get back up and you're much more, you have more to give, I guess.
So what causes that higher sense of like a higher acuity in the mornings?
Well, here's my theory.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that for sure. I think first of all, I think it has to do with that circadian, this cycle, the normal cycle, right? Mm-hmm. But I also think, and this is something we don't think about again about the brain. When you're really, critically thinking about something, your brain, your neurons are firing off. All these different circuits are firing off to allow you to do this, right? But whenever you expend energy, there's waste products from that. These waste products, I think, build up. And actually, we talked about this with amyloid in the brain when you sleep. But I think it's more than that. I think it's all kinds of different waste products that we don't even know, probably half of them. But as you go through your day, you're basically accumulating these things. And they need time to, at the end of the day when you sleep, you're going to clear a lot of that stuff, hopefully. But I think that if you're doing a lot of really high, powerful thinking and under maybe some stress and things first part of the day, I think there's probably some point in the day where your body just needs a quick little break, a little downtime. And that's why I think probably when people take these little 15-minute naps, then they're much more, they've been shown to be more productive after that. That may be why.
Gives the brain a chance to discard waste products.
Yeah, to kind of catch up a little bit and reset almost,
Okay, and I'm going to jump back to sleep real quick because this thought just hit me. Another thing that I heard is also theoretical is that at one point in time, our natural sleep cycle during the day was not a single window of sleep, but 2, or maybe even 3.
Okay.
And I don't remember who I'm going to have to figure it out and send it to you and see what you think again. But basically they said that, basically there's a longer window during the night, but we'd get up early morning, have another nap in the afternoon, but it was like a 2 or 3 hour sleep. It was a legitimate sleep.
Okay.
And then get up the rest of the night and do it again. Like two separate windows.
Yeah, I haven't seen that research.
Okay.
The research I've seen where, they took people and they put them in a dark hole and they wanted to see what sort of, without any exposure to outside light at all, right?
So their bodies didn't know.
And they didn't give them clocks. They didn't, so they had no idea. They wanted to see what would the body normally, naturally do? How would it cycle? And it ends up, it was like a 24 and a half hour cycle. So it's pretty close to the 24-hour cycle that we live by now. So, yeah, I don't know why. I can't think of any reason why the body would have done that.
Yeah, it could have been one of those things. I don't remember where this came from. It could have been just some, analogous reasoning from somebody that didn't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, the research that I know and what I've learned over the years and what seems to work best for me and for my patients is what I talked about, right? Mm-hmm. So, and incidentally, when I talk about a power nap, I don't mean a 2-hour nap.
Right.
Your nap's actually what we're taught. It's called sleep hygiene. And one of the best practices in sleep hygiene is this: go to bed at the same time, get up at the same time, 6 to 8 hours. And then if you take a nap, it has to be less than a half an hour. Because if you don't, if you make it more than a half an hour, remember the 90-minute periods I was telling you about? Mm-hmm. Your brain has a tendency to think, oh, it must be nighttime.
It's going to fall into a cycle.
It's going to start to try to fall into this cycle.
Which is going to throw everything off, right?
And then if you ever notice, like when you take a 2-hour nap and you get up and you're like,
just a zombie.
Yeah. Because you just caused jet lag.
That's what that is.
Your body has no idea. Is it supposed to be awake? Is it supposed to be asleep? What's it doing? It's what jet lag feels like.
Wow. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. That's so cool. I've never even thought about that. But yeah, I've absolutely experienced that. Yeah. Where you take a nap expecting to get up refreshed and you're way worse off. Almost feel sick.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, that's crazy. So it's literally your body just thinking that it was time to go and start falling into the cycles.
Yeah, you probably woke up right in the middle of deep sleep.
Oh, wow.
And your body's like, whoa, I'm not supposed to be doing that.
Wow. It's really interesting.
There's a lot of... one other thing I was going to say, actually... How do we know a lot of this stuff? Well, it's really fascinating to me. The way we've learned a lot of this stuff is when the brain doesn't work like it should. We've learned how it should work, right? So, for example, with sleep, when you go in these deep stages of sleep, one of the things that happens is you dream. That's when most of our dreaming occurs. Well, when you dream, as you know, a lot of people, when they start to drift off to sleep, will start to act out a dream. They'll kick their legs that's fairly normal unless it interferes with your sleep altogether. But it's fairly normal. But then when you go into this deep sleep, it's called REM sleep, rapid eye movement. The only movement that you should be having is your eyes. And your eyes, if you watch somebody in that deep sleep, their eyes are darting around, right?
Yeah.
To your point about the brain being really active, that's a really active phase. So there's a mechanism by which your brain paralyzes all of your muscles except for your eyes, and breathing, of course, all the stuff that you need for life. But no skeletal muscles should be working, because otherwise you act out your dreams, right? Believe it or not, there's actually a disorder called REM sleep behavior disorder. It means that when you're in REM sleep, instead of just being your eyes that are moving, the switch didn't get flipped, and your whole body's moving.
That's dangerous.
Dreams, which can be, it's not so good for the spouse.
Oh, yeah.
Because sometimes you'll dream you're having a fight, and bang, you pop the spouse.
Only one of you guys is dreaming about it.
And then, of course, before we knew about this, I'm sure that some people thought that's this guy's making excuses. He's just beating his wife, and he's, But actually, the interesting thing about this is, lest you think this isn't real, very highly associated with Parkinson's disease later on.
Really?
Yes. So there's some connection. We don't know what it is, but that REM sleep behavior disorder puts you at higher risk.
Yeah. And just a personal experience on that. The paralysis switch, sleep paralysis. I'm sure you've heard of that.
Yes.
Oh, I've had that before. Only one time. And it was probably the most terrifying experience of my entire life.
There's a lot of history about that. Even
my gosh,
artwork and such.
To be awake, I thought I actually died.
Yeah.
I was convinced because it lasted so long that I had time to think about it.
Yes.
I was awake but couldn't move at all. I could see, but I could only see one spot, and I couldn't move. I luckily didn't see anything because that would have sent me over the edge.
Yes.
But I hear a lot of people, they actually see stuff and hallucinate during that.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, sleep paralysis. So that's the opposite issue, right? So you're in this deep stage of sleep, and then you wake up, and normally that switch that I talked about that paralyzes your muscles, normally that thing goes off right away, and you're able to move right away, most of us. But for some reason, some of us, that's delayed, and that switch is still on, but you're alert and awake. And some people throughout history, they've thought it was like a demon or something that was sitting on their chest. Because I don't know if you had this or not, but some people will say that it feels like an elephant or something sitting on their chest because they're holding them down.
Yeah, I didn't have that. I was laying on my side. I was in a hotel room, so that was also terrifying because when you go somewhere new and you're not in a familiar environment, when you wake up, your first thought is, "Where am I?"
Yeah.
So compound that with the fact that you can't move. That's my experience. So that was miserable.
It's got to be scary.
Yeah, it was spooky. But nothing, no physical sensations whatsoever.
Yeah, but see, I think for some people, they're laying there and they can't move, and it feels like something's holding them down.
Because they think they're fighting it.
They
think they're trying to push away.
Yeah,
but
they try to fight it.
So it feels like there's something heavy.
So their brain is sending the message, move, and nothing's happening.
Yeah.
And so that means there's something, again, if you don't understand, right, what do? You put in
analogous reasoning.
You think of some other reasoning for it, right? Well, it must be a demon or something pushing down on me, keeping me from moving.
Mm-hmm.
Now we know that's not true, of course, but there's some, I'm trying to think of who the artist was, but I remember learning about this when we learned in residency about this. They were showing us pictures in the textbook of artists, famous paintings and things where they show these demons sitting on top of these people. And the theory was that was somebody whoever drew that, whoever painted that had that experience of.
Well, I mean, I would have believed it too if you'd give me a little bit of the hallucination thing during that experience and I saw something, I would probably have described it as a demon. So,
keeping on that topic of sleep and all of that, I sometimes will get consulted for somebody who's hallucinating. And when I actually take a history, which is really important in medicine, a lot of docs, maybe we don't take the time to do this as much as we used to. We should do this because if you don't take a good history, you don't find out that it's only happening when the person is waking up from sleep or going to sleep. And there are these things called hypnopompic hallucinations. I always think of pompic as the eyes are popping open, so that's when you're waking up, and hypnagogic hallucinations when you're going to sleep. And if the hallucinations are only occurring during those two stages, that's not schizophrenia, that's not bipolar disorder, that's not some sort of psychotic disorder. Some people just have that. It's a normal variant of that can happen to people. So let's say you had these hypnopompic hallucinations, visual or auditory things that you see or hear that aren't really there, but in your mind they're very real. That's a hallucination. If that happens at the same time as you have sleep paralysis, and you're seeing something in the room, that's where I could see easily where somebody would think there's a demon or something sitting on their chest, right? That's fascinating to me. But that's not necessarily a reason for concern. Those things happen to people. And again, if you educate them and you explain to them how the brain works and that this is just a normal thing that can sometimes happen, it takes away the fear. They know what it is. They're not afraid anymore, and then they don't have as much problem as they did before.
I got two things I want to get your thoughts on, and then I'm going to try to tie this all back together real quick. So the first thing is, when I was a kid, I thought maybe I had like some psychosis, where you see and hear things that aren't there.
Yeah, psychosis.
I thought I had psychosis because is actually when I was falling asleep or waking up, just in a normal sense, anytime, even today, I can hear music in my head. Like if I want to listen to a song and hear a song that I already know, I can hear it perfectly. Like it would sound on, if we played it through these headphones. But when I was waking up or going to sleep, sometimes as a kid, I literally thought I was hearing it. I thought I could hear it.
It sounded like it was real coming out.
Yeah, and I got to a place where I could kind of control it. Like if I knew, like it was almost like a lucid dream. Have you ever had a lucid dream?
Yeah.
It was like a lucid dream. I would know that I'm just barely on the edge of sleep, and I knew exactly what's happening, and I just would let the music play.
Yeah.
I've not been able to do that for a long time, but I just remember that. So I'm curious what that is. Is it part of what you're talking about there?
I don't know exactly in that situation what that was. I would say if it hasn't contributed to any kind of problems going on, growing up and stuff and in adulthood, it was probably some sort of developmental thing.
Yeah.
And it.
Well, I wish I had it back. It was kind of a superpower.
You liked it.
Yeah. I could turn the bass up really loud. My mom wouldn't yell at me.
Yeah. No, I think about it. It has to be, if we think about it from a circuit standpoint, it has to be partly related to memory, partly related to this, like enjoyment of the music and things. So it was pleasurable, emotionally positive.
Yeah.
And so, it was coming back. And the reason it was so vivid, I don't know. I think the piece that we still don't understand, like when people have schizophrenia, that's a psychotic disorder. That means something's wrong in the brain where they are perceiving things that other people aren't, right? Now, people argue, well, how do we know they're not the ones that are right and we're wrong, right? Well, I think just because the majority of
rules.
other people, the majority of other people aren't seeing or hearing it. But it can be very disturbing for people with schizophrenia. And we don't know exactly what's happening. We think that in some parts of the brain, there's too much dopamine. And then folks with schizophrenia also have a lot of trouble in the frontal part of their brains with their cognition, things we call like executive function. So it's their ability to organize and plan and that kind of stuff. They have a really hard time with that, which is why a lot of them end up homeless, unfortunately, because they can't take care of their own finances. They can't stay with a job. They can't, all of those things. But the hallucinations, where they come from, nobody knows for sure, but we think it's too much dopamine in the perceptual parts of the brain, because one of the things we can do to treat that is we give a medicine that blocks the dopamine and in that part of the brain. Well, it blocks the dopamine everywhere in the brain, unfortunately, which can be sometimes a problem. But at least it helps with those hallucinations. So we have a lot to learn. I mean, I talk like we know everything. We don't know everything. We're scratching the surface here. But we know a lot more than the actual everyday person knows, I think. And that's where we have work to do, all of us.
Just education.
Yeah.
And we start here.
Exactly. That's right.
So the other thing I was going to get into, because we were talking about interruption of REM sleep and this and that. Have you ever heard of a doctor named Dr. Matthew Walker?
No.
He's dedicated a significant portion of his life into researching sleep.
Okay.
And he's fascinating to listen to. One of the things he was talking about was an anomaly that happens when somebody who is chronically impaired, so alcohol or marijuana use, disrupts their REM sleep for so long that the brain basically says, I'm taking it wherever I can get it. And then what happens is you get what he called delirium tremens, where in the middle of the day, you'll actually start dreaming. You'll be halfway in a dream state and halfway in a waking state. And so basically you'll hallucinate. Okay. But it's your brain just fighting to get some REM sleep, to get some of that, to get some of the REM sleep back.
Yes. So I think there's probably a convolution of two different things, right? So delirium tremens is the name. Delirium tremens is when people withdraw from alcohol. Let's use alcohol as an example. But
that's what actually he said.
It can be Valium.
He said this happens when you come off alcohol.
Yeah.
Right.
So what happens there, so when you're taking alcohol, it's a depressant. It slows the brain down, all the brain circuits. It's not selective to where it slows everything down. So and what happens then is your brain, it adjusts to the environment. We talked about this. It adjusts to your environment. If you're constantly applying the brakes to the brain, it's going to regulate itself up a little bit, right? Try to keep going, right? You got to be able to keep functioning. At least it wants you to. So it regulates itself up. And then what happens if you stop the drug all of a sudden? The alcohol in this case.
Well, you're in a
you take away the brakes.
Yeah.
And then the brain goes, right? You can actually have seizures. So delirium tremens means you can hallucinate. In delirium, you're confused, you hallucinate, and typically visual hallucinations. So people will see things that aren't there. And the tremens part is the seizures, but there's all kinds of other stuff, like your heart rate goes through the roof. It's deadly. It actually can be deadly. When you see that, it's an emergency, medical emergency, because people can die from it. So you got to get them. What you got to do at that point is you got to get them back on something that slows the brain down again, and then wean it off instead of just stopping it cold turkey.
Wow.
That one is deadly. So withdrawal from depressants like alcohol and Valium, Ativan, and Xanax. If you're a chronic user for a long time and you stop cold turkey, there's a real, that can be dangerous and be deadly if you're not careful. Opiates and other things, uncomfortable as hell, not normally going to kill you though. So that's a good thing. The overdose can, but not the withdrawal.
Gotcha. All right, and to wrap this all the way back down to the initial start here was we were talking about everything living on a continuum, right? And we talked about ways we can influence that. We talked about your physical well-being and your sleep hygiene, as you said, and then your basic understanding of how the brain works as ways to affect and put pressures on the places in the continuum that you rest. All right. So we ventured into productivity a little bit. Yeah. But that's where I want to circle back to.
Sure.
I'm just curious because I just think, for me, I just feel like I can just be doing a lot more, but I don't know where the limitation is. And I know it starts with the brain. There's a reason I make a conscious decision to do something that I know is not the best thing for me to be doing in that moment. When I could be working on this document and getting this contract ready, but instead I'm over here messing around because I feel like it. Why is this happening, and what can I do to have an effect on that? I mean, sleep hygiene, taking a break, maybe it is burnout, but I don't think it's always burnout for me.
Yeah,
I don't
no.
think it's always burnout for everybody. What else is going on?
So answer me this: which one is more fun, doing the other thing or doing the document review?
The other thing.
Yeah.
Always. Yeah.
So one gives you pleasure, one doesn't. Which one are you going to prioritize?
Right. Have you ever heard of a dopamine reset?
Don't think not in this context, or
Yeah, exactly in this context. So you remember a while back when I told you I went on that all meat diet for a week?
yeah.
Just ate the same exact thing for 3 meals a day, right?
Okay.
Super bland, but I just forced myself to do it. And it basically wiped away. I didn't do it long enough for this, so I'm not going to act like I'm not patient zero here. But if I went for a month, it would have wiped away it would have put me back at a baseline with dopamine when it comes to food. So if I would have forced myself to just eat beef every meal, every day for a month, when I came back and ate chicken would be the best thing in the world now.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So I've trained myself to now be accepting of the healthy solution, chicken.
Okay.
Can you apply that same concept to other things in life? Is there a way for me to make drafting a contract for a business operations agreement more fun?
Yeah, if you associate it with something, we talked about the memory. Can you associate it with something
More fun?
Can you somehow associate it with something fun?
Probably not.
Maybe. Listen, let me give you some suggestions. So here's
Thinking about the future,
well,
thinking about, what is going to come
playing
from
your
this?
favorite music while you're doing it?
That's true. Yeah.
If you can focus. Some people can't focus, but doing something or having a beverage that you really like, at the same time that you're doing it. Lots of people do that, coffee or whatever else you pick it. So there are ways to make things, at least to get by.
I've come to an uncomfortable conclusion, like just in sitting here listening to you say that. I think I've already maxed out my ability to do all the things that I want to do while I'm doing the things I don't want to do. So I think I have a lot of dopamine resets to do.
Can I just let me make one observation?
Yeah.
You definitely will have to do things in your life that you don't like to do.
Well, I've learned that lesson the hard way already.
Lots of people do lots of things they don't like to do, but they do it with they also keep in mind what's the ultimate goal, right? What's the end point of this?
That's what actually drives me more than anything.
What's the big picture? Not just this document, but what's the big picture? My God,
Yes, the business that we're going to create after this document's drafted.
Yes.
It's the patients that we're going to affect with that business.
That's right.
It's the employees that we're going to, have high incomes because of this.
Yeah.
It's the money we're going to get at the end of the day.
So put something inspirational like that up on and change it every so often. Like, it's a picture of a group of patients, or it's even more concretely, it's some goal that you have, personal goal, like it's a new house, and here's a picture of the house that you want to get, or something that kind of gives you the why, right?
Sure.
And makes it a little more concrete as to why you're doing this boring task. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, absolutely does make sense. Yeah, just again applying importance to it again. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just back to the productivity thing. I think also realize that we have limitations. I mean, we talked about Elon Musk. I think he probably would, if we were here right now, he would probably admit. I hope he would admit. From what I hear, from what I read in the papers and such, he probably hit a wall.
Oh, he's admitted that publicly.
Has he admitted it? Yeah.
He specifically and famously said, during the production ramp of the Model 3, he said, nobody should be doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's like, it's painful.
Yeah.
He literally had tears running down his face. He goes, this is painful. Nobody should do what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It wasn't fun.
So let that be a lesson to us, right? For all of us. I mean, yes, being successful is something that is important for everybody and should be for the right reasons. But I think if you're doing that, if you're trying to push yourself so hard that it's beyond what humans should do, there's going to be you're going to break. I mean, you're not Superman, Superwoman. You're going to break just like everyone else breaks. How that looks may be different. Some people get extremely irritable and angry and treat the rest of the office like shit, Other people, they turn it inwards and they become extremely depressed, self-critical, beat themselves up because they can't do what they think, what this sort of aspirational, this sort of, I should be able to work 12 hours a day and, do all these things. Look at these other people, they're doing all this. They're seeing the outcome of you look at Elon Musk, you see what the end point is, but none of us saw what happened to him or what he was going through at the time that he was going through this. He made these comments, but you have to set realistic expectations for yourself and then, achieve those. And then you get some successes and that makes you feel better. Mm-hmm. If you don't do that, you're going to have a tendency to burn out. And burnout looks like depression. It looks like anger. It looks like a lot of things, suicide in some cases.
So to your point with that exact topic, I actually want to point out another kind of a toxic environment that the entrepreneurship culture has right now. And that is social media. And I think a lot of people, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on this, a lot of people don't realize when they're combing through social media that what they're seeing is a hyper-specific, perfect representation that's staged and timed out in whatever person's life you're looking at. It's not reality. So what happens is people see the Lamborghinis and they see this guy bringing in all this money and his business is working great and he's never having any problems on his social media. That's because he chooses not to show that stuff.
That's exactly right.
Right? That's a picture that has a filter on it that was staged. It was taken 7 times. The guy's depressed the rest of the day and taking phone calls. Yeah. Like, it's just not realistic. My question to you is, what sort of effects does social media have on society at large?
I think it has a huge effect on us. Yeah. I think the things that we see and we take in our environment, as we talked about, they change the brain, right? Mm-hmm. They physically change the brain because you learn certain things, right? And if you learn things that are unrealistic, think about the teenage girls with Instagram and all these other, Snapchat and all these things. These girls are putting these pictures of themselves, airbrushing themselves and enhancing certain parts of their body and other things. And they're setting these sort of unrealistic, unachievable goals, views of themselves, which then other girls look at as a goal. Mm-hmm. And then you can't, because it's
not real.
Not realistic. You can't do it, right? It's impossible. So it immediately sets all these girls up for failure. Instead of sending the message that, oh, hey, look at this person. They can be successful without all the fake stuff and all the other, doctoring up of the photos and so on. Yeah. They can be successful just being who they are. That's the message we ought to be sending.
Yeah. So social media, it sets up an unrealistic expectation in the brains of the people that, soak up that content. Yeah. And so for the entrepreneur crowd that we're talking to right now, from my perspective, I would just say that it's extremely difficult, and you have to want those challenges. You'll have to want to face those challenges if you're going to be successful in running your own business. It's not as glamorous as it looks on social media.
Yes.
Yeah. And then from your perspective, from the psych perspective, it's crazy that you're saying there's an actual change in the brain by soaking up that content.
Yeah. You have a skewed view of the world now. Mm-hmm. You have a skewed view of what you should be aspiring to. And a lot of times that's not even possible.
Not obtainable, yeah. Yeah.
So that sets you up for failure from day one. And then, of course, you have a bunch of failers in your mind, because you think...
Where's the money at?
Because you're not doing you're not the Elon Musk of the world or whatever. In your head, that's a failure. Yeah. And it's not realistic.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that a lot of, almost every business that gets started fails. And I think it's because the expectations of people that start it are starting in the wrong spot. The expectations are way too high. You get in it and it's supposed to be exciting and happy, and there's supposed to be a lot of money, and there's supposed to be your employees are supposed to be happy every day, and you're supposed to be happy every day, and it's always supposed to be an up. You're never supposed to take losses, and it's just not realistic. And it's kind of sad that that's what's put out into the world, because it sets everybody up for failure, just like we're talking about.
I mean, if you look at the most successful people in the world, they didn't get there just without any kind of hiccups at all.
Yeah, Elon Musk is the perfect example. We can keep going back to him.
Right? How many times did he fail before he got really successful? I mean, you can't. It's not realistic. The way we are successful, whether it be in any kind of, it doesn't matter what the field is. The way we're successful is we fail and we learn from that. We fail again and we learn from that, and you don't give up.
Yeah,
you keep going until you figure it out, and all those failures. Your job is not to sit and kick yourself for the failure. Your job is to learn from that failure. What did I do here? What would I do differently the next time? And each time you learn something new, you implement that into the next version of whatever it is you're doing, okay? And that's how you succeed. It's incremental. It's very rare that we come out with a scientific breakthrough that cures a disease immediately. It's very rare that hey, I got this idea for a business and, 6 months later, you're a billionaire. That's extremely rare, probably, if ever that happens. I don't know. Without something that's swindling people.
Right.
cryptocurrency, things like that. That's, yeah. What's that guy's name?
Sam Frank. Yeah, I don't want to say it.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. But I mean, and throughout history, there have been people like that, right? They make success, but they do it by kind of abusing other people in a way.
So you watched my first podcast. You remember that time, that moment I talked about optimism? I said, is optimism a cause or effect? Because a lot of people look at me, and I've gotten a little bit of traction on some of the projects that I've been working on, and they'll say, "Oh, well, you're happy because it's you got it going on now."
Yeah.
Well, my argument is that it's not the case at all. I've got the things working now because I've been optimistic through the trials, right? Because just to your point, you said you're going to face failure.
Yeah.
I've learned to actually, to an extent, I'm not perfect, but to an extent, I've learned to get excited for failure. The small problems that I face, it genuinely excites me because I know I'm learning something.
Yeah.
Because at some point, when you've done the same thing for so long, you stop learning things so often.
Yes.
And it's only through failure when you truly learn something impactful.
Right.
So I've learned to actually get a little bit excited about it. That's just optimism. And I preach optimism heavy. Like that's going to be one of the main drivers of this channel, because I genuinely think that's one of the most important things ever. It changes everything. It changes just your perspective on everything. It changes how you handle things. It changes how you feel, how you act, how you behave, how other people think of you. I think optimism's a huge driver of success if you want to go into entrepreneurship.
Yes.
What is optimism when you're thinking about it through the context of the brain?
So this is a really interesting thought, and I had this thought when I saw the first video, the other video. So I like that mentality. I think that's a very good mentality to have. There are actually cognitive behavioral treatments for folks with depression, for example, where what we do is when you get depressed, I don't know if you know this, but maybe a lot of the listeners don't know this, but you have these automatic negative thoughts. I'm worthless. I'm going to fail every time. Nobody loves me. And in a really bad situation, sometimes, everybody else, and even myself, I'd be better off if I wasn't here. Those are automatic negative thoughts that are not based in reality, but the person's mood is helping those thoughts, kind of reinforcing those thoughts. It's a mood thing. Now, one of the ways we treat that is we teach them to challenge those thoughts. What's the evidence that you're worthless? What's the evidence that you fail every time? And when you actually force them to look at it, okay, they didn't fail every time. They had some successes here. What's the evidence that everybody hates them? Well, there's usually not that much evidence for that. Maybe there's one person they're having conflict with. Hate's a strong word. Do they really hate them? What is it?
Or maybe their brain's filling a void that they don't, like we were talking about earlier.
But here's what I think. To get people to do that, in my experience, though, you've got to get their depression up to a level where they can actually focus and they can actually start to do those kind of things. Because when somebody gets into a clinical depression, we call that major depressive disorder, which can happen to anybody if you have a brain. If you stress a person enough, you can get depressed, clinically depressed. And when you're in a depression, everything looks bad, right? Your relationship's bad, your job looks bad, you can do no right. All of these things that we just talked about, these negative thoughts, they come flooding into your consciousness. And that's like the first thing you think about all the time. If you're an entrepreneur and you have that you start to get burned out and you start going into this depression, you can try to smile, you can try to be optimistic. It's going to be very difficult to do if you get into this really bad clinical depression, okay? So at that point, you need to see somebody. You need to talk about the depression. You might need to consider medication or other treatments. The psychotherapy can be extremely helpful and can change the brain and all in the ways that we talked about. But sometimes the mood circuits in the brain, and by the way, all of us have it. A mood circuit is the circuit that dictates how high and how low your mood might be able to go, and controls the moods basically. So some people can go really high and get manic, and some people go really low and get clinically depressed. But if you have a tendency to get too depressed, or either one, or up and down, stress will trigger those things and that mood to do that. And once you get that low, it's very hard to. People try; they put on a smiley face or whatever. But when you see somebody that's depressed, you can kind of tell. They look like a different person. And and I've never done this, but I've often thought about this. Because people, when they get that depressed, when they come out of it, they don't remember being that bad. I have often thought, boy, I could take a picture of them and show it to them when they're depressed, then show it to them when they're not. Then they would remember how they were. And I don't know, it's really interesting that, and probably because the brain is what we use to sort of to tell if something's wrong with us or not, right? And if it's not working right, we may not know that there's something wrong with us. So anyway, back to your point, optimism is great. We definitely need to work on positive thoughts rather than negative thoughts. And this is, social media comes in here too, because it's all negative. It's all a lot of, most of it.
All content from society at large today is negative, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's very much.
If you look at mainstream media, you look at social media, even the good stuff is a negative to some extent, because again, you end up comparing yourself to whatever you're looking at.
Yeah.
And in comparison, you don't feel like much.
Right.
Right. Because it's all fake.
Yeah, and I also think that social media, I don't know if this is a human's fault or it's just artificial, the artificial intelligence algorithms or what it is, but I think where the brain comes into this is that we're hardwired to have an us versus them mentality. You know what I mean by that?
Sure.
So, to be a sports, like sports is one example, right? You love your team, you hate the other team.
Right.
There's no in between.
Yeah.
But also when it comes to other things, politics, some people, it's much more like this than it ever used to be, where there's no in between anymore. It's like you're either hardcore conservative or hardcore liberal, and there's no in between. Most things in life are actually in between. Most things in life are gray, not black or white. But our brains, we sort of have this tendency,
a default nature,
to see ourselves as us versus them.
Sure. And so when you're
That's
going through social media, you end up putting yourself you're on the defensive because that person has something I don't have.
Yeah. But the social media, the algorithms for these things, they'll suggest things that you might like this if you watch this, right? If you try an experiment sometime and you click on something you like and then just keep clicking on what they recommend, sometimes it will take you down into very, very extreme things. And if you're a kid or you're a young person who doesn't really know much different, or even if you're just very suggestible type person, some people are a continuum again, right? Some people are much more suggestive than others. If you just keep clicking on this and you just take it to heart, whatever you're seeing, this is how you get, fundamentalist websites that get people into being suicide bombers, or you get racist you become white supremacy sites and other things. You just keep getting more and more and more and more and more down into the rabbit hole, as they call it. And I don't know, again, if that's I think it's an artificial intelligence algorithm.
It's definitely an algorithm. And I think that it's like
that.
It's just like anything else that's good, it can be overdone or misused, right?
Yes.
And I think the intent behind the algorithm, the way that it's set up, was originally for good. And that's debatable too, because really what it is a dopamine response.
Well,
It's they're just
manipulating
pandering
you to click on something they're going to make money from.
And they like that because then your the amount of time you're going to spend on the platform increases, and you create a habit, you create an addiction.
And
but what happens is, exactly. You're saying if you're a suggestible person, or
yes,
it can absolutely entirely artificially change your reality.
Yeah.
It changed your entire viewpoint.
And back to what makes us unique and what makes us, we talked about the brain and how it's wired up, our experiences throughout life and all of that, and how we are unique as people. You take a certain mix of environmental, somebody that's raised in a certain way that has lots of chronic stress and neglect and emotional abuse or neglect. All of these things don't feel very good about themselves. Well, they're getting accepted by some particular group, and it's really easy to kind of get them to feeling good about themselves, and then you feel good about the group that helps you feel good about yourself, and the next thing you know, you
just believe what they believe now.
Yeah, you believe what they believe, and something extreme happens.
I hate how I keep coming back to this all about me and my experience, but that's what I have to relate to at this point.
Yeah, sure.
I know super consciously that happens in social media, and that's why I'm so against it. I don't really watch that much social media at all. And when I want to collect information from the world, I go down to the most fundamental truths I can get. So if it's political and I want to find something about this new law, I don't listen to, I actually do. I'll listen to Fox News and I'll listen to CNN. I'll listen to the opposite equivalents. But then I go read the bill. Nobody does that.
No.
Everybody operates on emotion. It just operates on what the next person told them.
Well, because they don't have time too.
Yeah, and they get the information only from their group, the group that you've just talked about.
Right.
And of course, that's going to create polarization over time. Those two ends are going to shift further and further apart naturally, right?
Yep.
So I wish we could get more people excited about going to the fundamental source of whatever it is that they're talking about and thinking about the actual thing rather than what they're hearing.
Yeah.
Everything that you're hearing and everything that you see has been designed in some capacity to make you a return customer.
Yes.
And to some extent, they're pandering to what you already have a predisposition for wanting to hear. So it's all fake. Again, just like social media.
Yeah.
It's all an illusion. The Matrix.
Yes.
So, but yeah, it's really interesting.
We've got to solve that problem somehow.
I know. And how
I don't know
do
how
you do it?
Well, I think part of it is you've got to re-engineer these algorithms so that they don't. I mean, there has to be a way that both parties get what they want, right? So that the social media platform wants advertising dollars, and so the advertising dollars are gonna, whatever you click on, the more you click on something, the more advertising dollars come in, and so
isn't this the problem that independent journalism or journalism in general was supposed to solve at one point in time? They weren't the right wing media or the left wing media. They were we're just reporting the facts.
Expose everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need that again. That's what we should have. We should have a third tab. We should have the tab for following, the tab for me, which are the two primary tabs in all these social medias now. It's who you actually truly followed, and they'll make a feed for that. And for me is what the algorithm suggests. We need a third tab that just says, here's the actual bill that everybody's talking about today.
Yeah.
Click on that, goes to the .gov side, read it.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
And then make your opinions.
Yeah.
But nobody's going to read it.
I was going to say,
fun.
Xavier, do you
It's
think
not fun.
how many people you think would read it?
It's not very fun.
People click on things where they can look at it and their attention span is like less than 10 minutes. Right?
Yeah, that's what TikTok mastered.
Yeah.
As much fun and as much dopamine that can be released in as little time.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's very interesting.
It is, yeah.
I don't know the solution to that problem, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because I think that today more people are aware.
The first thing is people need to understand it. It's kind of like we don't have all the solutions to treat all these brain illnesses and things that I talk about all the time or that I treat. We don't have the solutions, but at least if you understand it, you don't judge it as much. You don't have as much sort of stigmatization of it. And then if you understand it, you can start, people can then make a little bit more of an informed decision. Right now what's happening is people don't maybe understand these things. They take it as gospel and they get all worked up, right? They get one extreme or the other, they get worked up, and then you've seen these protests and things, and one side comes out to protest, the other side, we're going to show up too. And the next thing, I'm always worried there's going to be some big
problem there. It's like, and all for what, right?
Yeah.
That's another thing that you probably heard on the podcast, amicable disagreements. And also the ability the ability to assume that you, to some degree, don't know exactly entirely what you're talking about.
Yes.
That your position is to some degree flawed, no matter how much you believe what you believe.
Yes.
If everybody could adopt that mentality and always just be seeking to further refine whatever truth it is that they're working with, I think everybody would naturally be more accepting of each other.
There'd be less escalation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I totally agree with that comment you made about that. We need to be able to talk about things in a sane manner without somebody
ruining friendships.
Just F you know what you're talking about. That doesn't nobody any good. What the heck does that? Why can't you? What does it hurt you to listen to somebody else?
Sure. And I think
why do you have to always be right?
Right. And the concept of just
that's an ego thing, I think.
Right. And the concept of just being okay with not agreeing on something is gone.
Yeah.
Like if you don't agree with me, then we just don't associate anymore.
Yeah.
That's so like counterproductive.
You know how many people in my life that I don't necessarily agree with, but I still like them in my life.
Yeah.
Because we don't agree on one topic or other or something. It doesn't mean we can't be friends. We can't, hang out and have a fun time. We just don't necessarily talk about that all the time.
One thing that's kind of unique about my friend group, we're all kind of like, we always kind of think about these things all the time. We think very deeply about everything and we keep up with current stuff. None of us agree on anything. And we're the best of friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the best thing
because
now,
involved.
Yeah, all of us now have our opinions challenged constantly, and it gives us a chance to refine it to the best of our ability and to hear these new perspectives. Like that's a good thing, and it's been completely dismantled. There's a negative connotation with any sort of disagreement anymore, and that's something else that needs to be fixed. It's a bigger problem.
We think we have to win, right? And I guess the question I would have, and again, back to sort of challenging thoughts and automatic thoughts. Challenge the automatic thought that you have to win everything, right? let's say, for example, that I don't convince you of some argument. Is that terrible? I mean, is that, like, how does that affect my life? Is that terrible? Like, can I never be your friend again because we disagree on something? I mean, think about it rationally. What the hell?
Yeah, and that's where my head was going when you were talking about the protests and the other groups showing up. What impact are either of those people going to have on anything?
Well, they're probably not going to convince either side.
No.
It's because they're showing up in an antagonistic setting that it's not likely to lead to good things.
It's probably about a 0% chance that you change anything.
Right.
So there's just no point. Yeah. And that's like, I think people get into these arguments, put way too much, place way too much value on the argument, on winning the argument.
Yeah.
Like there is no true value in winning the argument unless that person is in office and is about to sign into law whatever it is that you disagree with.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. Go petition your local government if that's what you want to do.
Right.
But to ruin a friendship with somebody because you don't agree on something is ridiculous.
Yeah. So. I agree. And I think, there's a lot of reasons that people that have certain very staunch beliefs about things. And again, I don't think that we should judge that. If they have a strong belief about something, whether it's for something happened to them or people that they relate to historically, or maybe personal experience, something happened to them with personal experience, we just have to accept that that happened and that's how they feel about it. There's no sense in me trying to argue with them about that. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they're emotional about it. That'd be the last thing to argue with them about.
Yeah.
Why not just be supportive of them and just say, I understand how that's got to make you feel. That's tough.
Yeah.
Or I can't understand how that would make you feel. I haven't been through that before, but I can tell it's really upsetting you. And listen, I'm here for you.
It'd be huge if people kept in mind that everybody is just a product of every experience they've ever had prior to the moment you're interacting with them.
Yeah.
And that you have gone through 0% of what they've gone through, and their perspective is entirely different. They're looking at life from a completely different vantage point.
Yeah.
And so there is probably some real validity and truth to whatever it is that they're saying, and so that's an opportunity for you to learn from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like, I know that sounds so cliche but that's the way to overcomplicate that.
Yeah.
Make more sense.
Yeah. So I do think sometimes people also get offended if they've been through something very hurtful in their lives, right? Mm-hmm. Or the folks that they associate with, something really bad has happened to them. I think that they're very sensitive to. Well, their initial assumption is that anybody who's questioning that or wants to know more about it, or that those people are kind of arguing the case against them or something. And that's not always the case. Sometimes people just are ignorant. They just don't know. They haven't had that experience before. And so you have to be a little open to, there are going to be people out there that don't understand all the stuff that I'm talking about. They maybe don't have all the passion about it because it didn't happen to them. But that doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean they can never understand. It just means they don't yet. And maybe it's better for you to have a conversation with them and not get all upset about the things that they don't know when they ask questions. Be open to their questions. Help educate them from your perspective on how they see, and don't get all upset about that. Mm-hmm. That's one way to kind of diffuse some of this stuff. It's interesting. So I did these videos. My thing has always been the brain, and if we could understand the brain and how we, like we talked about before, how we are hardwired to respond to certain things, or why people act the way they do, or and so on, we would be much more tolerant of each other. We would stigmatize each other less. We would judge each other less, and we'd have defense. Our defenses would fly up less. I think it would be great. So I had this idea. I did this little local lecture for my community called "It's a Brain Thing," where I talked about all these different brain disorders and stuff. And somebody suggested, this is way back in like 2004 or 5. Somebody suggested, hey, there's this thing called YouTube. It's coming up, and maybe you should put them on there if you want to reach a broad audience. And so I did that. And I remember thinking at the time, this is going to be great. It's going to go all over the world. I'm going to be able to reach people I never could reach otherwise. And hopefully they'll start to understand the brain better. And this will start even into childhood, how important it is to raise kids, with emotional intelligence and so on. If you can teach people that, you could have a sea change of society, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought the internet's going to basically take people who had previously been isolated. All they ever heard was what their family taught them, or their church taught them, or whatever whoever they were around growing up. you could be really isolated in the middle of nowhere in the U.S. or wherever else in the world, and all you know is one thing. With the internet, you can meet people from all different cultures and races and religions and so on, you could have a better understanding. You could actually meet people and understand how they are. And I thought that would be really helpful. And instead, that's not what happened with the internet. It should have made the world smaller. It made us all more divided,
Compartmentalized.
It made us all more like extreme in our thinking about things, which is not exactly what I was hoping would happen.
Yeah.
It's a sad thing, actually. I think it still could change.
The optimistic, I was going to say, the optimistic way to think about that is that it just hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't. And I think it's sometimes it takes these sort of
learning through mistakes.
Exactly,
like we talked about, it's all coming back, right?
Exactly.
I wish that's what the internet was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you say, I mean, I don't think it's not that it can't get there. I mean, it's just that I think we're hardwired to look at the sensational stuff, right? That's one thing. We're hardwired to look at us versus them. So when these videos come up that they suggest and they take us down the rabbit holes, it's going right to our, it's matching our brain a little bit, like our brains are wired to sort of already be kind of drawn to that stuff. What we need to do is we need to have somebody take a really strong look at that and say, is there a way that you could still ethically advertise to people without doing this, without taking them down into the rabbit hole? I don't know who polices that, but at some point it's going to need to happen, or our society is going to kind of...
Well, nobody polices it right now.
I know. Yeah.
Technically the federal government, but they're all operating 40 years in the past anyway, so we need some younger blood in Congress, basically.
What's that? There was a Netflix series, Social Dilemma, I think it's called.
Yep.
That was really eye-opening. If you haven't seen that, listeners haven't seen that, you may want to watch that.
Absolutely.
It's really eye-opening, I think.
Well, cool. So would you like to take this on and encompass everything that we talked about from the perspective of the brain all the way through? I'll actually hit the bullet points again, because I like to do that. We started with understanding that all of our abilities to do things naturally are a combination of a genetic predisposition and a continuum that's sort of governed by where that genetic predisposition lies. The continuum can be flexed based on environment, based on even habit forming. So even to this day, if you want to get better at something that you're not so good at, you can work towards that.
Exactly.
So we talked about, in order to have the best opportunity and best chances at making that happen, you would want to make sure the foundational stuff there, your body's health, your mental hygiene, your sleep hygiene, as you said, and actually have a genuine understanding of the fundamentals of what's governing the things that you're trying to change, being the brain. If we're going to wrap this back into entrepreneurship and productivity and stuff, a lot of what we're fed today is fed with motivation, with a monetary incentive, and people want to capture your attention. We are the product these days. People don't realize that. If you're not making money from it, you're the product. If it's free, you're the product. So because somebody's selling your view time for ads.
Yeah.
And so they need your dopamine, and that's what it's designed for. So another thing, it's really important to business is everything we just talked about this last 20 minutes. Being open-minded, listening to other people's perspectives when you don't agree with it, assuming that you're wrong to some degree, because you probably are to some degree in everything. Or you could be better. That's another way to put it. You don't have to say you're wrong in everything, but you could be better in everything. So other people's perspectives really do matter. You shouldn't shut down based on hearing something you don't agree with. What was the last few things we touched on here?
Well, I mean, to kind of summarize what you were just saying, that being humble is okay. It's okay to be humble. It's okay to, be okay with somebody else not agreeing with what you're thinking. Mm-hmm. Let that go. Choose your battles. Why is that? Why do you have to die on your sword for every single thing that you talk about?
Right.
That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So that's I just in general, I think the better we understand our brain and how we're hardwired for certain things, there's flexibility there for sure. So the better we understand how we're sort of like where the brain will take us naturally, better we understand that, the more we can work with that, right? We can challenge the negative thoughts. We can, work on the anxiety or the depression or the burnout. We can start to consciously sort of attack these things head on. And if we understand the brain and how it normally works, that's how you're going to feel the best when you tackle these things, as you tackle these things.
So again, it comes down to just understanding the brain. And this conversation has honestly been incredible. Like, I think this has been seriously like a huge value add for me personally, just listening to some of these things. And I know it's been for the audience. And what I think would be cool is if we could have you come back and dig down deeper into different topics. So, I mean, these are just my ideas, and we'll come up with this off the air, but to have you come back and talk about sleep specifically, we can go into super great detail on sleep so that people genuinely have such a fundamental baseline understanding of sleep that it's impossible for them to mess it up. That's what it takes for me. Until I know that sleep's important. Like I said, like I know it, but here I am still doing things against my sleep, even though, but if I knew it so well, if I knew everything you knew about sleep, I probably would never mess it up. And then maybe we can come back and do one on relationships, and maybe we can come back and do one on stress, and then maybe we can come back and do one on something specific to productivity, and maybe I can dial the questions in better on each of those things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Okay.
I think be careful. So it's not as easy as just understanding something, and that's enough for you to be able to do it, right? People understand that they shouldn't eat so much, or they might have obesity, right? People understand that if they use the next line of cocaine, they're going to lose their kids. There's a difference between understanding something and actually making behavioral changes. And maybe that's one of our topics we should talk about at some point, because I think that in our society, one of the big areas that we still stigmatize is with things like substance abuse and things. We tend to think of things as conscious choice. I did this too early in my practice. I did this. I assumed that it was, if you're alcoholic, just don't drink the beer. How hard is that? You know what I mean? I don't drink much, so it's not a hard thing for me, right? Or don't use the drug or whatever. Now that we understand the brain and what those things are doing to our brains, I fully get why it's not so hard, or it's not so easy to just not drink or not eat or whatever. And so we should talk a little bit about some of that stuff. So, because just wishing that, just thinking that you can be optimistic all the time, it's
is
great
much
to
different than
strive for
actually being able to actually
do it.
Yeah.
Right? There's lots of things working sometimes against you in that pursuit. And that I think you need to understand too, because otherwise, number one, if you're going through it, you're going to think you're a failure because you can't do it. I don't want folks leaving this discussion today thinking, oh, well, I just need to think more about optimism. I should be able to be optimistic like Xavier, because everybody should just be able to will themselves into being optimistic. Or I just need to hear about what happens with sleep and understand sleep, and then I can maintain my sleep cycle. It's not so easy. There's other circuits that kind of work against you a little bit, right?
Gotcha.
Whether that's a primitive drive to use to eat or to use the drug or to have more sex than you should or whatever. There's primitive drives working against you, right? And it depends on how your frontal lobes are able to push back on those as to which one wins out. Some people, the primitive drives win out. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means that's how they're wired. So anyway, we should talk some more about some of those things, I guess.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's really important to know, so that people don't feel like failures, and we don't judge them all as failures.
Right. Sure. Sure.
Anyway.
Yeah, I think it's valuable. Any more light we can shine on how the brain operates under each of those circumstances.
Yeah.
I mean, that's at least going to give people the tools to begin the journey of thinking about those things differently.
Yep.
And that's the only chance that anybody has at changing something, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I'd love to see us be more tolerant of each other.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
I think that's one way to do that, is to understand why folks, maybe understand a little more about why folks do certain things or don't do certain things. That can help, I think. So.
Absolutely. Well, super cool.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Dr.
Appreciate
Henley.
it. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming. This has been seriously fantastic.
Yeah.
So.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every